You've got the wrong man.
Your wife's name was Rose. I went speeding that, sir, for Mommy.
I went to great lengths to find you, Nathan.
She gave to this ward 11 years. You kept it up after she died. This is the reward. It's yours, Dan. All of it.
Nathan.
Your daughter needs that surgery.
It's not for taking. That's the whole point. Rose said, Dale, you don't give so it comes back. You give so it keeps going. If I take it now, for mine one, then I made it alone. She never did.
These stories are made with love, and this one begins with a banner. The banner hung over the hospital atrium in letters 2 feet tall. Reward, $500,000, offered by a woman most of the city knew by name, for information leading to a stranger. And beneath it, at 6:30 on a rainy Tuesday, a father in a gray porter's uniform pushed an empty wheelchair past the whole gleaming promise and never once looked up. His name was Nathan. He had a mop closet key on his belt and a photograph of his little girl in his breast pocket, and he was the man the entire building was searching for. He did not know it yet. He only knew that his daughter's surgery had a window, and that windows, in his experience, closed. He walked under the reward and thought about nothing but the coffee going cold in the break room, because in the life Nathan had learned to live, love was something you settled quietly, like a bill. Rain came down the tall glass and sheets that night, and the ward on the 4th floor smelled of warm plastic and antiseptic and, faintly, of the crayons Grace kept in a coffee tin by her bed. She was 6. She had a heart that had been born tired, the doctors said, a valve that worked when it wanted to, and not when it was asked. There was a surgery that could fix it. There was also a number attached to that surgery, and the number was larger than every dollar Nathan had ever held. He came to her room at the end of his shift, the way he did every night, and he sat on the edge of the mattress so it wouldn't creak, and Grace opened one eye and said, "You smell like the elevator." "That's because I am the elevator," he said. "Didn't they tell you? They fold me up in the morning." She smiled without much strength behind it, and that small, tired smile did what nothing else in the world could do. It made him afraid. He had learned long ago that fear and love were the same animal wearing 2 coats. On the table beside her bed, there was a drawing. 3 figures in green marker, standing in a row. One of them had wings. Nathan did not ask about the wings. He knew. Rose had been gone 2 years, and Grace still drew her into every family she made. Up in the corner, watching, giving. "Did you eat?" Grace asked him. "I ate a whole cow," he said. 2 cows. Liar. "A small chicken," he admitted, and she laughed, and the laugh caught somewhere in her chest and turned into a cough, and Nathan held very still until it passed. The way you hold still near something you love and cannot protect. Down the corridor, a nurse named Denise found him later, filling out the same form he filled out every week. "You know there's help for this," she said gently. "The foundation, the charity fund. You could apply, Nathan. People do." "I'm not taking a handout," he said, and it wasn't pride the way she thought it was. He couldn't have explained it if he'd tried. Taking was a country he had no passport for, so he signed the payment plan instead. A letter that came each month with a crease down its middle. A number he paid down $40 at a time. A promise to owe more slowly than he was going. He folded that letter into his pocket beside the photograph and went home to a quiet apartment and did not sleep. 12 floors up, in an office with a view of the wet city, a woman named Claire Whitmore stood at the window and could not sleep either. She ran the company her father had left her, a name on the side of buildings, a fortune that did not warm a single room she lived in. 2 months earlier, her accountants had brought her a folder, a routine audit of an old family trust, and inside it, Claire had found something that stopped her breath. 22 years of donations, anonymous ones, money that had appeared, quietly and without a name, in the account of the children's cardiac ward at this exact hospital. The ward where, at 9 years old, A sick and frightened Claire had once been a patient herself. Someone had been paying, for decades, for children who would never know his name, and on the very first record, clipped to the very first check, there was a note, handwritten, 4 words in a plain, unhurried hand. Pass it on. R. Claire had read those 4 words 100 times. She had built her whole search around them. She had put $500,000 behind finding the person who wrote them, because she owed her life to a kindness she could not repay, and Claire Whitmore had never in her life left a debt unpaid. That was the shape of her wound, though she'd have bruised anyone who called it that. A free thing terrified her, a gift she could not control, could not match, could not settle. It hung over her like weather, so she would find this benefactor. She would thank them properly. She would make it even. She did not yet understand that some kindnesses are not meant to be made even. They are meant to be handed forward, into a dark you cannot see the end of. The charity night was set for that Friday, the great annual gala the board threw to raise the ward's endowment, and Claire had let it be known that she would announce her search there, in front of everyone, and double her reward. The man who did not want her to succeed was named Preston. He was the chair of the hospital board, silver-haired and smooth as a coin, worn down by handling, and he had reasons of his own. For years, Preston had quietly moved money, small amounts, then larger ones, out of the very funds that the anonymous donor had been feeding. He had covered the gaps by borrowing against future gifts, trusting that no one would ever audit an anonymous account, because how do you audit a ghost? Now a CEO with too much money and too much conscience was about to shine a light straight down into the place he had hidden things. If she found the donor's records would surface, and if the donor's records surfaced, so would the holes. Preston did not intend to let that happen. He was not a dramatic man. He did not make threats. He simply began, that week, to make things disappear. A file here, a signature there, and to see to it that the surgery schedule for the cardiac ward ran short of funds at exactly the moment a certain porter's daughter needed a slot. It was nothing personal. Preston had never once learned Grace's name. That was the whole horror of him. He was cruelty without heat, damage done by a man reaching past you for something on a shelf. The gala filled the atrium with candlelight and rainlight both. Women in long dresses, champagne carried on silver trays. A string quartet playing something soft under the murmur of 500 people who had come to feel generous for an evening. Claire moved through it in dark blue, shaking hands, and every third person asked her about the reward, and she said the same gracious sentence again and again, while her eyes searched the room for a face she had never seen. And 2 floors below, in a service corridor that smelled of bleach and old coffee, Nathan pushed a laundry cart past a humming vending machine and drank the worst coffee in the building from a paper cup, and he could hear the quartet through the ceiling, like music from another planet. Champagne above, vending machine coffee below, in the same breath, in the same building, separated by nothing but a floor and a fortune. He was thinking about the schedule. Denise had told him that afternoon, her face careful, that Grace's surgery window had slipped. Funding, she'd said. There'd been a shortfall. They were working on it. Nathan had nodded the way a man nods when a wave hits him, and he decides not to fall down in front of anyone. Then he'd gone back to work, because work was the one prayer his hands still knew. Upstairs, Claire stepped to the small stage. Upstairs, Preston watched her with a glass in his hand and a plan behind his eyes. Then the lights went out. Not all at once. A stutter, a surge, and then the whole east wing dropped into darkness as the storm took a transformer somewhere out in the wet night. The quartet stopped. 500 people made the sound crowds make. The backup generators caught with a shudder, and the atrium filled not with candle gold but with the flat red glow of emergency lighting, turning every face the color of an alarm. In the red light, Claire heard the first voice that mattered, not fear, but a nurse's voice, sharp and trained, calling a code from the direction of the pediatric wing. The power flicker had hit the monitors. Somewhere, a small heart had chosen that exact moment to falter. It was Grace. Nathan was already moving before he knew why. He'd felt it, the way you feel a change in a house you've lived in. The elevator's dead, the red light, the particular pitch of running feet above him. He took the stairs. He took them the way a father takes stairs, lungs burning, and he came out onto the 4th floor, into chaos, lit like the inside of a warning. His daughter's room was full of people, a nurse working carefully, a doctor's steady hands. The monitor Nathan had learned to read in the long nights had gone flat and frantic by turns. He stood in the doorway and did not fall down, because he had promised himself years ago, over another bed, that he would never again be the man who fell while someone he loved needed him upright. "Sir, you can't," someone began, and then saw his uniform, and then saw his face, and understood in the same instant that this was the father, and stepped aside. They brought her back. It took 90 seconds that Nathan would carry in his body for the rest of his life, and then the flat sound climbed back into a rhythm, thin and unsteady, but there. A doctor turned to him, sweat at her hairline in the red light, and said the words plainly, because there was no time to dress them. The valve was failing faster than they'd hoped. The surgery could not wait for a window. It had to be now, this week, and the funding was not in place, and without it the hospital could not schedule the theater. Nathan reached into his breast pocket. He took out the folded payment plan letter, the crease worn soft as cloth from 2 years of handling, and he looked at it as if the number on it might have changed. It had not. It never had. He had $40 a month and a daughter with days, not years. And into that exact moment, drawn by the code and the crowd, came Claire Whitmore, still in her dark blue gown, red light on her pale face, standing at the edge of a father's worst hour, without any idea whose hour it was. She saw the child. She saw the man. She saw the folded paper trembling in his hand, and something in her, the part that remembered being 9 and sick and certain she would die in a room exactly like this one, moved before her caution could stop it. But it was Grace who spoke first. Grace, barely surfaced, oxygen at her nose, eyes finding her father the way they always did. She lifted one small hand off the blanket. In it was a folded square of paper, one of her drawings, creased into a tight little packet, the way children fold things they mean to keep. "Give it to the nice lady," she whispered. Rose said, "Pass it on." Nathan went very still. He took the folded drawing from his daughter's hand, and because a child had asked him to, and because he had never once been able to refuse her anything, he turned and pressed it into the hand of the stranger in the blue dress. A father, in the worst hour of his life, giving away the one thing he had, because his little girl told him to. Claire's fingers closed around it. She did not open it yet. She only looked at the man, and the man looked back at her, with an exhaustion so complete it had gone quiet, and neither of them knew yet what the paper in her hand would become. That was the first crack. Not romance, nothing so quick, just two people recognizing, in a red-lit room, that the other one was real. Nathan refolded the payment letter and put it away. He did not ask her for anything. That was the thing Claire would think about later, lying awake. He had a woman worth $500 million standing an arm's length from his daughter, and he did not ask her for 1 cent. He simply gathered his child's hand back into his and turned away, and got back to the only work that was his to do, which was to stay upright and stay there. Claire did not sleep that night either. She sat in the back of her car outside the hospital while the rain finally thinned, and under the dome light she unfolded a child's drawing. 3 figures in green marker, one with wings, and along the bottom, in the wobbling hand of a 6-year-old copying something she had seen 1,000 times, 3 words: "Pass it on." Claire sat with that for a long time. Then she made a call, and the next morning, before the gala's aftermath had even been cleared, she was down in the hospital's records archive with a court order and an accountant and a flashlight, because the power in the East Wing was still out. The archive was a low room of steel shelving and cardboard, and the storm-gray morning came through one high window in a single shaft, thick with floating dust. Claire pulled the oldest ledgers herself. She found the anonymous account. She traced it back, year by year, check by check, further than she'd managed before, all the way to the very first entry 22 years old, and clipped to it, yellowed now, was the original note in the plain, unhurried hand. "Pass it on. R. R. She had always assumed a man, a wealthy man, discreet, perhaps long gone. But beside the note, in the archive's donor log, an entry she'd never had access to before spelled it out in full, where the anonymous flag had been overridden once, long ago, by a clerk who hadn't understood the request. Rose Bell, and an address Claire recognized, because it was 3 blocks from a hospital porter's apartment, because it had belonged to a nurse who had worked this very ward, a nurse who had earned a nurse's wage and given away nearly all of it, in small anonymous amounts for 11 years until she died, and whose husband had quietly kept the payments going for 2 years more after her death. Smaller now, because a porter earns less than a nurse, but never stopping. Never once stopping, even as his own daughter's bills piled up. Even as he refused every offer of help for himself, he had gone on paying, in secret, for other people's children. The benefactor Claire had offered $500,000 to find was not one person, it was 2. A dead nurse and the widower who had kept her promise. And the widower was a man in a gray uniform who had pushed a wheelchair under her enormous banner without looking up, because he did not think of what he did as anything a person would search for. Claire sat down on an overturned crate in the shaft of dusty light and put her hand over her mouth. But the ledgers held more than Rose. As the accountant worked the columns beside her, another shape began to surface in the numbers. A slow bleed out of the same funds, patient and deliberate, running for years under a signature Claire recognized. Preston. She sat very still with that page in her lap, and she understood what it would cost her to pull it into the light. The scandal would land on the board she chaired, on the endowment she was building, on the very hospital whose name she'd staked her own to. She could bury it. A woman with her resources could quietly cover the holes, retire Preston with a handshake, and let the wall stay clean. No one would ever know. She looked at Rose's 4 words again. Pass it on. Not protect what's yours. Not keep the ledger even. Claire made the call herself. She handed the auditors everything, holes and all, and she stood in front of her own board and named what Preston had done while he sat 3 chairs down, because a nurse she had never met had taught her, 22 years too late, that some things you do not get to settle quietly. Preston was gone by the end of the month, not because the numbers caught him, but because Claire chose to let them. It was the first thing in her life she had given away, without weighing what it would take from her. She found Nathan at the end of his shift, in the break room with the bad coffee, and she did not lead with money, because she had learned something in the archive about the kind of man he was. She sat down across from him and she said, "Your wife's name was Rose." Nathan looked up, and the name in a stranger's mouth went through him like cold water. "She gave to the cardiac ward," Claire said, anonymously, "for 11 years, and you kept it going after she was gone." She set the yellowed note on the table between them, the original, the 4 words. "This is what I've been looking for. This is the reward. It's yours. It was always yours." And Nathan did the thing that broke Claire's heart open all the way, the thing that finally taught her what her own wound had been. He shook his head. He pushed the note gently back toward her. "It's not for taking," he said. "That's the whole point of it. Rose used to say, you don't give so it comes back. You give so it keeps going." He looked at the number the reward would have paid, and then at his own 2 empty hands, and his voice went rough. "If I take it now, for me, for mine, then I made it alone. She never made it alone." There it was, the wound beneath the man. Not pride, grief wearing the shape of a rule. He could give until it emptied him, and had, but to receive. To let someone pour something into his hands that he had not earned and could not repay, that felt like betraying the woman who had taught him that giving was the only clean thing. To be given felt, to Nathan, like failing Rose. And Claire, who had spent 2 months and half a fortune trying to make a kindness even, finally understood that she and this worn, unbreakable man had the same wound turned inside out. She could not bear to receive without repaying. He could not bear to receive at all. Both of them frightened of the same open hand. So she did not argue with him. She did something better. She did not give Nathan the money. She gave it to the ward. She scheduled Grace's surgery, not as a gift to a father, but as the first disbursement of a new endowment, a permanent fund in Rosebell's name, structured so that no child on that floor would ever again slip out of a window for want of money. Grace's surgery took 6 hours. Nathan sat in a waiting room and did not fall down. When it was over, the surgeon came out smiling, and a small, tired heart began, at last, to work when it was asked. They engraved the words on the wall of the new ward. Not Claire's name, though she'd paid for it. Not Nathan's, though he'd carried it. Rose's 4 words, cut into stone, above the doors, where every frightened family would pass beneath them. Pass it on. Nathan works there still. He kept the uniform. He turned down the office Claire offered him, and the title, and the raise past what the work was worth, and he kept pushing wheelchairs down the halls of the place his wife had loved, because that, he said, was the giving that was actually his to do. But he let Claire in. It happened the way real things happen, without an announcement. One gray afternoon, 3 weeks after the surgery, she came to Grace's follow-up, though no one had asked her to, and she found Nathan already there, and when she sat down beside him in the plastic waiting room chairs, he stood up without a word, walked to the machine in the corner, and came back with 2 paper cups of the worst coffee in the building. He set one in her hands. That was all. But Claire had spent her whole life unable to hold a thing she hadn't earned, and she looked down at the cup a porter had bought her with his own coins, and did not try to pay him back for it. She just drank it. And Nathan watched her drink it, this woman who could have bought the whole company that made the coffee, letting a small, unearned kindness sit in her hands, and something in his face that had been braced for 2 years quietly set itself down. After that, he stopped flinching from her, and she stopped keeping score of him, and so gradually that neither of them could have named the day, the friendship they'd built began to stand beside something warmer, 2 wounded people learning the same lesson from opposite ends. There is a photograph now in Grace's room, where the drawing used to be, the 3 of them, and up in the corner, still, a 4th in green marker, wings and all, watching. Grace is 9 in the photograph. She has a heart that works. She has taken, lately, to folding small notes and pressing them into the hands of children newer and more frightened than she is, on the ward her mother built. Claire watched her do it one afternoon, watched the girl fold a paper square and press it into a stranger's small fist, and Claire's hand went, without her meaning it to the place on her own finger where for 2 months a nervous habit had kept turning. It stilled there now. It had stopped needing to keep score. Beside her stood Nathan, and for the first time since Claire had known him, she looked at him and saw a man standing without a weight on him, upright, not because he was bracing, but because there was, at last, nothing left to brace against. "What did you write?" she asked Grace. Grace shrugged, the way children do about the most important things. "Same as Mom," she said. "Pass it on. Same as she did." And it does. It travels farther than any of them will ever see. Out the doors under 4 words cut in stone, into hands that will one day hold it out to hands not yet born. A dead nurse's $40, still moving, still going, never once alone.